And welcome to another episode of Patriots Fourth and Two. Derek Hazen, Steve Alscherry, as always. We're both PatsFans.com bloggers. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the new coaching additions to the Patriots and give our reaction to the AFC and NFC championship games. Before we do anything, I always want to check in with Steve, but I also want to go ahead and say please do subscribe to us on our YouTube and Apple Podcast channels. If you can like, share, or leave us a review anywhere you listen to podcasts, it keeps us high in the podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. Just to go ahead, because we always keep it transparent on the show, I want everyone to know I've had my mouth cut open, shot up, Novocaine, everything. I have blisters literally all over my gums. It's a blast. So if you literally can't feel half the side of my face, so if I sound a little funny, I apologize. But before we get into it, Steve, how you doing, buddy?
Always a pleasure, my friend, and doing well. I mean, it's been a crazy day around here, as I'm sure everyone has had. But we're all
Just
plugging
life.
along,
Yep.
and you know how that goes.
100%, 100%. So, look, we have some additions to the Patriots staff to talk about, but we also have some subtractions, and we'll start with those first. It'd be easier and quicker, and then we'll save the thoughts for the championship game for the end. I just figure we'll give a couple 5 minutes or so on that, and then we'll save our predictions for the Super Bowl for next week. So, Mike Pellegrino, Brian Belichick are not returning. Not really that surprised, Steve, with Brian Belichick. I thought it was really great that he stayed around last year, because from him, from a Brian standpoint, his relationship and his ties to the organization. I was like, okay, well, he still can fit into Gerard's system and a relatively similar defense. Okay, Pellegrino doesn't have obviously the Belichick connection. Um, Certainly disappointed that Pellegrino wasn't sticking around the staff. I think that he has been on a couple of different fronts really, really great with developing prospects. Certainly the end of the depth charts, technique, hand position, etc. I'm bummed, but it's not surprising because it's like, okay, it's a new regime, new era. You're going to have a lot of turnover. And so these are just two guys that certainly go ahead and are worth talking about. So give me your opening thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, I think both of these guys were very good coaches here in New England, and I know that a lot of Patriots fans get wrapped around the axe handle about nepotism, which is a crock of BS. Okay, because he grew up in the Belichick household, so he's been around football. He's been around the Patriots almost his entire life. Okay, and the proof's in the pudding. You know, if he was a bad coach, then it would have shown on the field. I think he was a very good coach. Um, you know, uh, this year the safety struggled a little bit, but you know, it turns out as we kind of thought, Kyle Duggar, who struggled mightily this year, was playing hurt all year, and then it just came out either yesterday or today that the
The
reason
ankle
was
injury.
he was he was more seriously hurt than even he knew, and he tried to gut it out. He didn't use that as an excuse. He said, he felt like he let the team down, but he had to have surgery.
Do you want to? Excuse me for interjecting. Do you want to talk about that part now, or do you want to wait until after this segment and then we'll move on?
Well, we'll come back to it, but
Okay, let's circle back. Sounds
yeah,
good.
and then Belichick's other safety, Jabril Peppers. He was missing for a good chunk of the year because of a court case, which luckily for
He
him
was
and
acquitted
thankfully,
on. Yep.
Yeah, that he was acquitted. So, but when you lose your top two safeties, that's difficult. Now, I do give him high marks. I think Del Pettis was a pleasant surprise. Thought he played real well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Especially down the stretch. He had a couple. I mean, I'm not going to go ahead and sit here and make him look like Ed Reed, but like he had a couple of plays, I would say, the last 2 or 3 games where I was like, hey, we saw you pop early. Yeah, you were low in the depth chart, so you weren't really around too much. But at the end, I thought he kind of made an impact, and I think he was someone to kind of put a small asterisk or a circle around his name or whatever you want to do going into training camp for next season.
right, absolutely, because he showed, at the end of the year, I felt like the game was slowing down for him a little bit. You seen him playing a little bit better. As you said, he made some good plays here and there. And for a young guy, that's not bad. We
Mhm.
can live with that. He's somebody that you think you can develop. And next year, if both of the guys are healthy and Pettis is still there, then you have 3 good safeties.
Mhm.
So I thought Brian did a good job. I
Yeah,
was sorry to
and
see
you
him
know
go.
what?
And
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, finish your thought.
no, I was going to move on to Pellegrino, but
Well, I'll go ahead and give my take on Brian, and we can wrap into Pellegrino. But all I would say about Brian is that look, like, yeah, there is a lot of nepotism in the league, and we all know that, and that's a kind of a separate conversation. But honestly, for his dad to be fired, and then them to go ahead and change regimes over, for him to be retained, I think says a little bit about him. It's not like the Crafts are doing him a favor.
Mhm.
Steve left and he went to UW and Bill did his own thing. I think Brian has earned his stripes. How good of a positional coach he is kind of hard to say for you and I and the listeners because we don't have enough kind of context. But at the same time, I think that him staying over spoke volumes for what Gerard thought of him and everything like that. With Pellegrino, this is also kind of a similar thing, a little different. Pellegrino, it's like, okay, well, the Patriots have done 2 things really, really well. For all their faults in drafting kind of towards the back third of the Belichick era here in New England, they really did a good job of drafting interior offensive linemen and defensive backs. And Pellegrino, I mean, I always thought the Patriots were really good at technique and especially like, they call it, in phase and hand technique with kind of breaking a pass. So let's use an example real quick. Let's say Tyreek Hill from the Dolphins is catching a pass over the 10-yard line and he has both hands going for the ball. And let's say Jonathan Jones or whoever's in coverage and
Mhm.
and he's trailing by a yard. He's able to click, close, close that gap, and then use his hand, to push through with the ball away from the middle of the guy catching his hands. I thought Pellegrino was instrumental in that technique, and that to me is where I think the biggest loss is. Now, I'm not surprised that Vrabel might have wanted to move on for whatever reason. Who knows? I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know. Who knows what Vrabel felt? Maybe he just wanted to bring his old man back together from Tennessee. I don't know. He's brought a lot of guys that he's known from, from other places, and we'll get to that. But I think for Pellegrino, I always thought that the technique, it was consistent. And I thought that you saw it from the younger players, and I always thought that he had a big hand in that role. So I am sad to see him go and hope he lands well on his feet.
Yeah, and I don't think the reason either of them are let go is because um, that Vrabel thinks they're not good coaches. I just think he wants to build and create a team and with the guys that he's the most comfortable with,
I agree.
and that's why he's bringing in all of his Tennessee coaches and a couple of other guys. But he's had the opportunity to sit back last year and You know, I'm sure he's been putting together a staff in his own head since the beginning, week one of the season when he was no longer part of the Titans. So,
Yeah.
and I think he's done a fantastic job. So I'm sorry to see Pellegrino go too. He's been around a while, and you look
Mhm.
at some of the corners that the Patriots have had while he's been here, and you have to give him a lot of credit for how all of these guys seemingly worked out. You know,
Well, I mean, I also would say too that even some of the younger guys, like we've seen flashes, and they again have done a really good job finding these kind of diamonds in the rough, interior offensive line, defensive backs. That's been kind of the name of the game. But this technique is also incredibly impressive. So I do think it's a loss at the end of the day. But I'm sure there's something to. I don't think it's a malicious thing or anything like that, but I do think that there's something to Rabel that he wants to go ahead and just carry over his own culture, his own coaching staff, and everyone that's cohesive and has worked together in the past. So that is kind of what it is. Where do you want to go next, Steve?
well, we can talk about the new hires.
Sure.
Yeah, they added a guy just today. He came from the Buffalo Bills, but also worked for Vrabel. Bowers, who's going to be the safeties coach. In Buffalo, he coached the Nickelbacks, and
Yep.
but just
Do,
he's a
do you have
really
the
good.
list? Do you have sorry? Do you have the list in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Let's start with quarterbacks and go through offense, and then
Sure,
let's
sure.
do from front to back. We'll just do it
Okay,
all together.
so offensive coordinator is Josh McDaniels, as we all know.
Yep.
Quarterbacks coach is Ashton Grant.
Yep.
Tight ends and passing game coordinator is Thomas Brown. Offensive line coach, which I think is an awesome hire,
Yep.
Doug Marrone. And I know I'm gonna butcher this poor guy's
That's
name,
fine.
but Jason, I think it's Hufftoling.
Yep.
Yeah. And then your running backs coach, Tony Dews, and offensive assistant is Riley Larkin. Defensive coordinator, as we all know,
Hmm.
Terrell Williams.
Yep.
Defensive line coach is Clinton McMillan. Outside linebackers, Zach Kerr. Inside linebackers is Milton Peterson. Defensive back coach, I don't know if it's going to be the corners or not, but it's Kevin Richardson. And
Yep.
then Bowers, who they just brought on today. Jeremy Springer is going to be the special teams guy, along with Tom Quinn.
Right. So Springer and Quinn. So let's start with special teams because it's easier. Springer and Quinn. I'm happy they're keeping Springer. Quinn worked with Vrabel in Tennessee. So I think those two things. I mean, I don't really have a ton to say about it. I think that it speaks volumes a little bit that with Vrabel bringing in his own staff, that someone like Quinn will stay as an assistant versus getting a promotion. I think that makes me feel good from an outside perspective with no real inside information that he feels strong enough that, hey, Springer did a good job. Like Vrabel's been looking at this whole situation, the whole organization. Mike Vrabel's like, let me diagnose this and then go ahead and make my decisions. He's made a lot of decisions that were like, okay, let me bring a lot of guys with me from Tennessee that I thought did a good job. The fact that he left Quinn as the assistant and Springer as the head coach tells me that he thought Springer did a good enough job to go ahead and keep his position and that he wanted Tom Quinn around him. Those two things are very interesting. I don't really think there's a whole lot that goes more into that. We don't have to get into the football aspect of it as much unless you want to. I think there have been some special teams issues, but I think Schooler's done a really good job going ahead and elevating. Marcus Jones is a really good returner. I think Behringer needs to be more consistent. And I think Sly really kind of started losing it at the end. So we'll talk about kicker on a later episode. That's kind of
But
where I have it for special teams.
they were much better than 2023 this year.
Sure, I would agree. I would agree.
And
And then somehow
the
everybody else left, and then they were much better when they left. But that's a whole different.
But the one thing
conversation.
I will say about the special teams coaching, it might say a lot about Tom Quinn. Because maybe with Vrabel coming in, I'm sure he talked to Quinn. I know he must have watched a lot of tape about the Patriots this year. But I'm kind of going under the idea that maybe it says a lot about Quinn, where he talked about his coordinator this year, about what a good job he's doing.
It's a good point.
And he's willing to stay on as the assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know if Vrabel offered him the job or not, but I'm just thinking that could be a possibility as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll flip over to the offense. We got Josh McDaniels, obviously. That's been, a very poor rumor, but we can start with that. To me, it's very clear that Vrabel is going with a lot of familiar faces. He's also bringing in some new people from different organizations, his own kind of web, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. He's also brought in a lot of experience. And we know what McDaniels has done in the past. There are some people that think that McDaniels is brought in because, like, Patriots fans liked him and they're trying to make Patriots fans happy. I don't believe that for a second. To me, two things. If you think that, then you don't know Mike Vrabel. He is not going to just be told what to do. He wouldn't have taken the job if they had said, okay, you can have the job and you can do whatever you want, but this is your guy. If he felt differently about it, he just wouldn't have it. Secondly, it really doesn't make a lot of sense on almost any level. It's just besides another just talk radio topic.
Right.
McDaniel will be interesting to see what Josh does. I do think he's a good guy, good person, good coach. We've seen him do and adapt to a lot of different things. And I wonder if the one thing I want to make about Josh, and there's a lot of talking points that are talking about a lot of similar things. And anyone who listens to our show probably knows a lot of these things. But to me, the one thing that I keep kind of playing with in my mind is Mike talked about how his team, he wants to go ahead and find out what they do best and then utilize it the most. And then someone asked him, like, oh, well, when you were in Tennessee, this is how you played. You ran the ball a lot. He's like, yeah, I had Derrick Henry in his prime and I had great offensive lines. And so, yeah, I utilized it the most. And he was like, I'm not going to be pigeonholed to that. What I think people are forgetting is that Josh, yes, he had Tom Brady, and that's an obvious fact. But I do think he knows how to coach offense, but he also did it in a lot of different ways. And I think that Vrabel is essentially doing an autopsy of the organization and the personnel as he builds his own culture, his own roster. And he looks at Josh as someone who can be kind of, he can adapt to whatever they do best. And I think Josh has shown that he can do different things. So he can do a spread offense. He can do a West Coast offense. He can do, COVID year. He can run RPOs and things like that. He can do a 2 running back pony system. Like there are a lot of different things that he can do. Whether it's the slot, whether it's the X with Randy Moss, whether it's 2 tight end, like he can do all that. So maybe Vrabel's just like, hey, this is a guy that I know. A guy that's been proven to go ahead and have experience as a head coach, whatever you feel about it. He knows how to adapt. And as I go ahead and deep dive in rebuilding this roster, this is a guy who can go ahead and maximize our strengths. And to me, that's what I feel like the missing pieces of a lot of the discourse on this hire.
Yeah. And, again, with Josh, I mean, we talked about this a little bit. offline, but he's
else
been
is new?
able to, yeah, he's been able to adapt, with the players that he has, and you look at the Patriots offenses through the years, and they've changed so much. When Brady first came around, they were a running team and pass second. And then, as Brady became Tom Brady, right? Then all of a sudden, they picked up Randy Moss, Dante Stallworth, and then they were spreading it out and flinging it. But then they went to a 2 tight end look. They continuously evolved with the players that they had, and you have to love that. And I don't understand all this talk about, the game has passed him by. I don't buy that. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. But you go back to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when Drake May was a rookie. Yeah, they had the training wheels on him, but look at the season he had.
Well, I
And
also would say too that, like, and we've talked about this, and I forget if we talked about it on a previous episode, but we've talked about it certainly offline. Josh McDaniels has run that Earhart Perkins offense for a long time. It's obviously adapted, but it has adapted to different personnel and different things. But even if the principles are same, it still is constantly being kind of an amoeba, concept. And even look at someone like Ben Johnson, who along with Vrabel are the two most valued head coach, I guess candidates, and Ben Johnson's roots come from the same system. And just as I give Mike Vrabel credit for spending time last year with the Cleveland Browns and spending time on the offensive line, tight end, Josh McDaniels did the same thing with doing college offenses to go ahead and understand how things are changing, evolving, what the terminology is, etc. And I think that's only going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and again, I mean, you look at when the Patriots were winning, and the one thing opposing coaches and players would say all the time is they were able to, basically change their identity from week to week depending on who they were playing. That comes from coaching. Of course, Bill had a ton to do with that, but Josh was kind of running the offense, and I think that's where he's at his best in Vrabel's eyes, because Vrabel's more of a defensive guy, and he hired a guy he's very familiar with to run the defense, obviously, but he'll be a first-time play caller. He will probably lean on him, meaning Williams will lean on Vrabel a little bit as when they first get going, until he finds his footing as a coordinator. And Vrabel is perfect at that, because we know, unlike this past year, he's a hands-on guy. Okay. I mean, he'll mix it up in practice with the players. He'll
100%.
If he has a teaching point to make, he'll get down and tell the players to just, go full bore on them. And, that's always been his style. But with the offense, he doesn't have to worry about that as much, because Josh has seen a lot and he's done a lot. And I think they're going to be just fine.
So there's a lot of different ways that we can go here, Steve, and we're not going to spend as much time on each individual position coach on offense as we just did on Josh. But I guess I'll just give my 2 cents on a couple different things, and then I'll get your take. But like Ashton Grant spent a lot of time with Cleveland, connection obviously with Vrabel from last year. Really impressive resume, and also seems to be pretty highly regarded. Interested in that whole aspect, and we can kind of circle back to that if you want. I would say that the pass game coordinator, to me, might be the second most, aside from Josh, noteworthy candidate, because sterling reputation, honestly, probably one of the most impressive coaching resumes for someone his age I've seen ever. Love that he has mixed in things from college, the pro game, kind kind of more traditional quote unquote offenses to also going ahead and spending time with the Rams under Sean McVay, who's more of a forward thinker and things like that. And then Doug Marrone, of course. I would be remiss to not make that the biggest point. I think that to me is a home run. Doug Marrone to me is a home run hire on a lot of levels. Now, look, I understand that some people are going to say, who gives a crap about Doug Marrone? He was a bad head coach or whatever. He spent time at Syracuse, spent time with the Saints. He's had 7 years of head coaching experience between the Bills and the Jaguars. He is by many accounts and honestly, in a lot of different factors, he's very well thought of as an offensive line guru. The Patriots now, for what it's worth, we're going to have 7 offensive line head coaches in the last 7 years. They've had no continuity. And if you ask any good offensive line group, what screws them up the most is them not having that continuity. It matters. You can argue with it if you want, and it's personnel and it's coaching and whatever. And they're going to have a ton of turnover in that room, 100%. To me, Doug Marrone not only gives Mike Vrabel essentially someone that he can give a huge load on Doug's plate as far as responsibility, also can lean on him for someone who's had head coaching experience, but also some leadership and everything else. So to me, the Marrone thing is a huge home run. I think that they really struck gold there.
Oh, absolutely. When you talk about Doug Marrone, he is one of the most respected guys when it comes to offensive line coaching,
right,
in the league. And people will always say the same thing. Well, he was a crappy head coach.
Well, so was Josh McDaniels, but he's a great offensive coordinator. We've seen it 4 different times.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes somebody's good at one thing, but not good at another.
Yeah, Doug Marrone wasn't hired to be the head coach. That's Mike Vrabel. He's going to do what he does best, and that's coach the offensive linemen. And, like we talked about at length during the season, the coaching staff last year were all brand new at their jobs. And now the Patriots have 3 guys, on the staff who've been head coaches in the NFL. And, they understand what Vrabel's going through because they've been there. They know how everything has to come together through him. And these guys will be there to support him, through this. And I think that, like you, I think Marrone was a home run. I was so glad when I heard that happened. And I think Patriots fans will see the difference in the offensive line this year. It's going to be akin to having the old Scar back,
Yeah, I mean, that's high praise for sure. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that the reason I'm so excited about Thomas Brown is that he comes from a totally different system under Kevin Stefanski, has some connections with Vrabel in the past, kind of comes from the Sean McVay, thing. And I wonder, in the back of my mind, is Josh McDaniels trying to rebrand himself as he goes back to spending time in college? Can he go ahead and is this hire a sign of, hey, let's not go back to the same old Patriots well? Let's go ahead and adapt and adopt a new system and change to the times. So I do want to mention, aside from Marrone, I do want to mention Thomas Brown again, because I do think that to me showed that they are really trying to go ahead and branch out a little bit more than what they've shown in the past.
Absolutely. And, as we always say, tight ends coaches make great offensive coordinators. And excuse me. And I think this guy will be one in probably very short order because they have to know everything. A good tight ends coach, He has to know the blocking schemes for the running game. He has to know the pass protection. He has
Yep.
to know how the guys,
Moving
account
and
for
out of
each other.
alignments and everything
Yep,
else.
and
Yeah.
the concepts of the passing game. So, and this guy has a really impeccable resume, as you said, for someone so young. And I agree with you. I think him and McDaniels will probably be joined at the hip, and I think they'll be bouncing ideas and off of each other, and they'll find out what works and they'll find out what don't. Because of the players that they're going to have, we don't know that yet. But once they have their roster, they'll find out what these guys do best, and they'll try to incorporate that. And what they don't do well, they'll toss that out and
So
play to their strength.
I guess the last thing I would ask you, and let's keep it a short conversation because we could probably really dive into a whole long conversation after this. Our good friends at Patriots Unfiltered, I thought brought up a really good point about talking about how it's basically a Paul and Fred argument, talking about how you could make a case for and against. And I don't want to speak too much for him, so I apologize in advance if I do. But I feel like I'm gonna go ahead and leave this open enough to kind of go from here. One side, you can go ahead and say that it's great to have a coach with a lot of other extra coaches with a lot of experience, versus the other side where it's like, well, if you have too many guys who think they've been right in the past but are now getting kind of quote unquote demoted or whatever, then maybe it actually can be, it kind of backfire on you a little bit. I don't really see it like that. I think that Josh has always done a good job of kind of running the offense. Now, I don't know the personalities of them. I'm not going to pretend that. If you want to tell me that you think Josh and Doug Marrone are going to kind of butt heads, okay. You want to tell me that Thomas Brown is a budding OC in the league, and he's a passing game coordinator, and maybe he wants to run something that's different than Josh and he's not comfortable with. Okay, but I don't really see that as an issue right now. What are your thoughts on that whole discussion?
Yeah, I mean it's a valid point, but I think when you have a head coach, excuse me, I'm all
yeah. If you need to get some water, I'll keep talking. You know me, I can talk.
But when you have a head coach with the personality of a Mike Vrabel, I don't see that devolving into this. If he was a weak head coach, I could definitely see this happening, because then, you have a guy that's waffling on making decisions with this and that, and these guys are going to want to, put their 2 cents in and step forward. I think these guys, plus, like I said, Marrone and McDaniels have been head coaches. They totally understand what Vrabel's, what his job entails. And I don't think this is going to happen. I think Vrabel's such a strong personality and kind of a pain in the butt, as we all know. But, I think they're going to be just fine melding together. They might butt heads on occasion about certain, things. I mean, that's human nature, You can't work in close proximity with, all these people all the time and not butt heads. It just it's not going to happen. But I believe that it's a valid question. But I think with a strong head coach like Vrabel is, especially his personality, and I don't worry about that.
Look, and I'm not putting PFW or Patriots Unfiltered into this category. I'm not at all. Those guys are all my boys, but it is a perfect perfect sports radio argument because it's literally impossible to know that answer. We can make cases for both sides, and we don't know how those personalities are going to go ahead and blend together, and that ultimately will make the decision for us to go ahead and find out down the line. But we can't know about it now. So let's take a break here, real quick, for podcast purposes, and when we get back, we'll talk about the defensive coaches and get into our thoughts on the AFC and NFC championship games. All right, we're back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Steve Balistrieri, Derek Havens, both PatsFans.com bloggers. Please do subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, as well as like, share, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It keeps us high in the podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. Steve, we talked about the offense, and we could probably spend some more time going through it, but it's all pretty fresh. Let's talk about the defensive coaching additions. I'll let you take the lead. Where do you want to start?
Well, we'll start with Terrell Williams, the new defensive coordinator. Again, this is his first time as a coordinator and a play caller. But, I mean, he's had, I think, close to 30 years of coaching experience. He's been in the NFL for, I think this will be his 14th season.
Mm-hmm.
There's
two words to me. There's 2 words to me between him and Vrabel that have shined through that are going to be a big culture shock for us. For us, whether it works out or not will be on them. But there's 2 big words: violent, physical. Both Vrabel, both Williams have said the same thing. This is not going to be your 2-gapping defensive scheme. I think they're going to be shooting the gaps, looking more for people like Jeffrey Simmons than maybe your Vince Wilforks. And I'm not saying there's not room for both. I mean, those guys would be fun to watch together, but it's very different style and philosophies.
Yeah, because with the Patriots, what we saw so much of was, we call it a 3-4, but it wasn't really. It's more of a 3-3-5, because they played nickel, the majority of the time.
As most people do now.
Huh?
As most do now.
Yeah. But I think with Vrabel and Williams, I think we're going to see more of a 4-2-5 with 4 men down, 4-man fronts, and as like you said, I don't see this being a 2-gap style of defense under these guys. In fact, I think they're going to be very aggressive. I mean, you hear them talk about violent. They want violent people. Well, that's not a guy who's reading and reacting. That's a guy that's coming after you. And I think they're going to be, the defensive linemen are going to be shooting gaps. They're going to be attacking. They're going to be playing downhill. I think we'll even see some probably wide 9 with these guys, which the Patriots really haven't run, but you see a lot of teams do that. But when you're an attacking style, you can get away with that. And I think that, we're going to see the linebackers blitz. And I do know that, with Vrabel, he likes to mix it up. So you might see, them shooting guys from the secondary, a safety or a corner. But I do think they're going to be very aggressive. And that's something the Patriots really haven't been very much in the past, especially under Bill. Bill liked those big 3 guys to 2-gap and to take away the run and, make you eat a piece of the turf at a time going down the field. I think these guys are going to be coming after you. And, I really look forward to that because, that Tennessee defense was good when Vrabel was there.
Oh yeah, and look, I mean, look, there's different ways to skin a cat. You know, I mean, like, look, we really liked the way the Patriots defense ran on balance for a while, but let's be honest. I mean, Demarcus Covington 2 years ago, you and I both thought was the best positional coach on the team. Gerard Mayo grew up in the Belichick system, they both ran a very similar system, and their defense was flat out crap. Last year just wasn't getting the stuff done. So look, Vrabel kind of runs a different thing. He's always been kind of more of an aggressive guy. He played that way offensively. I don't mean Vrabel played that way offensively.
Right.
But
I know what you're saying.
he coached that way offensively, and he played that way defensively. And he's always talked about physical, violent players. And what Williams said was very reflective of any time you've ever seen a clip of Mike Vrabel coaching up younger guys. He plays with, passion and energy and physicality. He always shows that. That's why he's at the pro days wearing his vest and going up with the guys doing literally one-on-one drills. He's a psychopath. And I'm stoked about that. Like, that to me is like really fun. Defensively, Steve, before we turn the page too much, let me pull it up here. Bad podcasting. I apologize, everybody. Is there another coach that you wanted to highlight? We talked about special teams. We talked about offense ad nauseum for a while, and we're going to have a lot more conversations about this, so I'm sure we're going to skip over people. But I would mention the other coaches, just again to refresh everyone's memory. We have Clinton McMillan, defensive line, Zach Kerr, linebackers, inside linebackers, Milton Patterson, Kevin Richardson. If you don't have an answer to this, it's no big deal. But do you have anyone that you wanted to highlight out of this regime?
Yeah, the guy they just hired him, Scott Bowers. I really like this hire. I see him coaching the safeties this year. In Buffalo, he was the nickelback guy, but I see him coaching the safeties. And again, I look at the safeties that they have on this roster, and we don't know what the timeline will be with Kyle Duggar's surgery, but we expect him to be back on his feet and doing Kyle Duggar type things. He's more of your playmaker. I think that a guy like Bowers will love Jabril Peppers, and especially having a guy like Del Pettis that it can fill in regardless of where they want him to plug and play if one of these guys needs a break here and there. But I think Bowers is going to love that safety room, and I could foresee them being right back on top of their game this year.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of shifts defensively. I think you're going to see offensive line. I think the whole roster. I mean, we can skip ahead to that if you want to, but
sure.
I mean, the roster on balance, Steve. You're going to talk about, I don't know, half the roster. I think you could see literally half the roster. If you had to say over under right now on if the same roster from last year to next year, could you see literally half being different? I think you're absolutely going to see it.
Yeah, and you mentioned this to me. I don't know if it was from Fred and the boys.
Yeah, Fred and Paul, and they had kind of mentioned something, and just the way
those guys are
kind
awesome.
Of doing.
I mean, they've been doing this for so long, and again, when you hear something from them, they're in the building every day.
It's kind of like number 7 on Mike Reese's Sunday column, where he just drops something in that you just kind of wonder. And it's like they're not just throwing paper towels at the wall to see if it sticks for fun.
No, I mean,
I'm not saying they know that, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, but they don't do that. I mean, those guys have been doing this for so long. They have a good feel for what's going on. They obviously have their connections in the building. I mean, Fred and Paul have been doing this. And, when they speak, it's kind of like Mike Reese, right? like you just mentioned, you kind of turn your head a little bit and you lean forward
Right. And you kind of
because
just listen up a little bit more. And I want to say
yeah,
just a couple things real quick, and then let's go back to this. But I want to give Fred Kirsch a shout out, who we're both friends with, who we've met several times. Great guy. He just celebrated his 30 years with the Patriots
wow,
organization, and he is just the best dude. Like I just think Fred's awesome. Paul, I feel the same way. Evan Lazar, I think, is so fun to kind of watch as a nerd, for myself, because he's so into the X's and O's that he really does a really great job of breaking things down and kind of getting into, getting into everything. And Mike Dussault kind of comes from our world, where he, I forget what he was doing before. I don't want to speak
catch
for him.
propaganda.
Well, yeah, no, I meant like what he was doing, like for a job and stuff before he went to work with the Patriots, but he spent a lot of time kind of going over different things, and I think they all have really good takes, different personalities, which is what makes that show great, and which is why they're so successful. But I think they're all kind of pointing us in the direction of there's going to be a big flip, and I think that based on the coaching staff specifically, just to translate it back to the roster, is we're going to see a lot of big flips, from the roster, just like we saw the coaching staff, because that's me Vrabel's vision and everything else. So, not sure where you want to start with the roster, but we can go anywhere you
Right.
want.
And yeah, I think we could be looking at only like 25 to 27 players returning from last year.
Yeah, so it's going to be right around half, I think, too. I do think it's going to be a big change, and
Yep.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think they just want to change the direction, the philosophies, what's going to fit their new systems. And let's be honest, even though there are some guys that a lot of people really like, for this, that, or the other reason, everyone's going to have their fan favorites, kind of so to speak. They have to go ahead and adapt to what they want to employ now. So I think that's super important as well. Again, look at the offensive line. Dante Skrnick is now walking through that door,
Yeah.
and we wish he could. But, now we have what Doug Marrone sees and what they need to do. And honestly, I think David Andrews is kind of the wild card about what he wants, if he's going to be back or not. I think he's going to be, but that's just my personal belief. No inside knowledge at all. But, okay, if Andrews comes back and you have Mike Onwenu, well, you're probably going to have 3 of your 5 starting linemen be different than it was last year, which is a big change, and that's just one positional group for the entire roster, so to speak. We talked about the penetrating, kind of more attacking, physically violent defensive line. That's not necessarily what they've had in the past. We don't know what Christian Barmore's health status is going to be. I am excited about what Keon White could do with Williams and Vrabel, and how he kind of grows into year 3. I'm not sure where you want to go from there.
You're right. Well, again, the nice part about having the whole staff, well, they still have some more positions to fill, but basically you have most of your staff already put together, and we're still in January. So now, as soon as they get back from the Senior Bowl, they'll be doing, draft stuff and, combine stuff after the Super Bowl. But basically, you're going to be looking at, all of these guys getting together, offense and defense, with Vrabel, and going over the guys they have on the roster right now. And then they'll decide, does this guy fit where we want to go? And if not, there's going to be guys saying bye-bye, And like you said, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, just because, this was what happens when you have turnover. I do think free agency is going to be huge this year. And again, They don't all have to be superstars, right? Because you're going to need guys to fill roles, just like Bill did for so many years. And that was one of the things that people kind of possibly forget about on purpose, was the fact that Bill was tremendous at finding role players, because not everyone can be an all pro on your football team. So, and once they decide that, then we could see a lot of guys leaving. And, again, I think that there's going to be a huge turnover on this football team.
Yeah,
we might even see less than 25.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a pretty big change. Where do you want to go next after this?
Well, you want to talk about the conference
games?
Game?
Yeah, let's do that. So, I guess as far as the Commanders-Eagles game goes, I expected the Eagles to win. I thought that they have been, the Eagles have done a lot of things really well. They've done a great job of drafting, developing, really strong in the trenches, great running game. I think Jalen Hurts, it hasn't always been perfect. I thought Brady, who I think is getting better at his, play-by-play, I think he made a really good point over the weekend about Jalen Hurts not pulling the trigger sooner and being a little hesitant when he throws. Mm-hmm. But, I think the Commanders are a great story. It's a huge credit to Dan Quinn and that staff over there in Washington. And as much as it'd be fun to see the Cinderella story continue, it's really is something that we talked about offline. Like, it's great to have those stories, but that doesn't really happen in the NFL too often. Like the Patriots in 2001 were kind of a Cinderella story a little bit, depending on how you want to break that down. But it's really not something that happens a ton. So it kind of makes sense.
That was Bill's second year. So,
So to me, the Eagles winning that game and pulling away in the second half was kind of a bloodbath, to be honest. Saquon Barkley looks like a guy who got out of a toxic relationship and just looks like super just happy to be living his life. And he is playing lights out. Anyone who says that running backs don't matter or you want to pay running backs a certain amount of money, I get that. And that's true most of the time. But Saquon is a good example of sometimes that you're just that good that you deserve to be paid what you're paid. And he just was just running wild. So I guess if we start with that game, anything from that game that you want to mention?
Yeah, again, I mean, I thought the Eagles' defense was, in the grand scheme of things, Washington scored 23 points, but I thought the Eagles' defense did a really good job on slowing down Jaden Daniels. And, it's not a knock on him. He's a rookie, played great all year long. But, sometimes that experience factor when, things turn south on you and you're in a big game and you're playing a really good football team, it can get away from you. And especially, like you said, Saquon Barkley is just on a mission. And you're right. I think he's probably the happiest guy right now in the NFL. The Giants were going to let him walk, and look what he's done this year.
No, 100%. It's been incredibly impressive.
I mean, he could have broke the league record.
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. If he wanted to, he could have. I mean,
yep. So but he decided that wasn't important to him.
Yep, and I think they're kind of on a mission right now, and Howie Roseman has done an amazing job at drafting and really kind of cultivating a really good locker room and kind of filtering guys in and out. So I give him a ton of credit. As far as the Chiefs go, the Chiefs Bills, to me, Steve, it was like the Chiefs kind of showed up like ho hum. This is, just another obstacle in the way of getting to where we want to go as a franchise. A lot of parallels to the Patriots. I understand that there are Patriots fans that are rooting against the Chiefs, and I can certainly understand that. But at the same time, I feel like you have to go ahead and give them credit too. They didn't score over 30 points a game until they needed to, but when they needed to, they put up 32 against the Bills. And the Bills looked like a team that hadn't been before, and the Chiefs looked like they had. And I thought that, were there some calls? Yeah, of course, there were some calls, and we can get into that if you want to. But I mean, defensively, their line play was really good. And look at the job that they've done, drafting and developing their lines too, and where they focused on, and now they're getting the job done with not Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball for 300 yards, but if he needs to, he can. He's the best player on the field. So I think for the Chiefs right now, it's just kind of like they're situationally really prepared. And they're very fundamentally sound, and they make good decisions when it matters most.
And how about Joe Thuney, right?
Oh man,
if they win next week, Joe Thuney will have 5 Super Bowl rings.
I mean, he's put together a Hall of Fame resume. I mean, I don't think there's a question about it.
He played left guard, and then their left tackle goes down, and he's playing left tackle really, really well. I when I first heard that, I was like, well, we know he's game, but I wasn't sure he'd be able to pull that off. Darn if he did. And again,
to make a comparison with Thuney, just to kind of work it into like draft talk as we work our way into that over the next few weeks, like Will Campbell from LSU. Like, there's a lot of talk about, does he have the arm length to play tackle? Is he going to be guard? I think he reminds me a lot of Thuney. Now, if he lives up to it, again, very high bar. I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to do that, but to me, that Campbell could potentially be a tackle or guard. I think he could play almost any 5 positions in a pinch and help you win a game. And that's what Thuney's doing for the Chiefs right now.
Yeah, and that was a mistake to let that guy walk away.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a story for a different time.
Totally agree.
And you're talking about Campbell. I was kind of leery because I was reading all these things about him, about his arm length and all this. But the guy you and I both really respect, Daniel Jeremiah said, that's not going to be an issue for this guy.
Yep.
So, and that's all I need to hear, because I think when it comes to evaluating these guys, I think he's right at the top. Daniel Jeremiah is another guy. When he talks about a prospect, you kind of lean forward and you take it all in. And I can't believe somebody hasn't hired him. You mentioned this as well the other day.
Yep.
That somebody hasn't hired him to run a personnel department, because, I mean, this guy knows his stuff.
I want to say he worked for the Eagles. I know he worked for the Ravens. I want to say he worked for the Eagles too, if I'm not mistaken. And just the way he evaluates prospects, kind of interesting. I would encourage anybody who's listening to this show to look at his top 50 list if you're curious about the draft, because his list I thought was really impressive. And again, we'll get into the draft stuff later. I don't want to make that this show's focus right now. But I do think it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, it's still a couple of months away, but it'll be here before we know it. But first we have to get through free agency. So.
and that's going to be a big thing. And it'll be interesting to see how Vrabel and his new staff wants to go ahead and assemble this new roster and the personnel and kind of the culture in the building for New England, and how they want to go ahead and build moving forward. And look, obviously health is always going to be a factor for players in any sport. And then also, it's not a secret to say, like, we need to see Drake May, do things better. We think obviously Drake did a really good job in his rookie year, but he really only won one game, and he was turning the ball over too much. So we need to see him go ahead and eliminate those turnovers, be a little bit smarter with the ball, and if he has a little bit more weapons and a little bit of help up front, maybe he's able to go ahead and take that next step forward, and that's what we're all hoping for.
Absolutely. And, we haven't mentioned him very much tonight,
No,
especially with all the talk about the offense. But I think that Josh is going to bring the very best out of him. And
100%. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to see what he comes up with to make things a little bit more interesting. Whether it's a little bit more quarterback, running options closer to the goal line and things like that. I thought when he had Mac Jones under center as a rookie, managed him really well, coached him up well, but also there were limitations and they were scared about him throwing into the end zone. I'm not sure that's going to be the same case with Drake. I don't think that's going to be the same thing.
no, because
they have different skill sets.
He has a cannon for an arm.
Sure.
So he can make all the throws, and you don't worry about that. And I think him and McDaniels will iron out his game. I don't. I was watching Josh talk about different things. People have been posting some of the old, podcasts and whatnot. I don't think they'll have him under center as much. I know they were trying to get him used to that, but he's not that comfortable with that. So I think that, he'll be in the gun a lot more this year, I think, with Josh, but we'll see.
Well, I also think that when you look at how the game has adapted and the players that are adapting, and college bleeds into the pros because that's the pipeline. So a lot of guys are either in the pistol, they're in the gun. It's a lot of spread. It's a lot of RPOs. It's a lot of play actions, different movement, different motions. I do think that there's going to be a little combination there. And, obviously Drake has to make sure that his accuracy is better and his feet are set, when he's making those throws. But I do think he has the ability to make pretty much any throw that you're going to ask him to. So that will be fun to kind of, analyze as we move forward. And again, we'll talk about the roster and about all that in the future. I guess any final thoughts on this conversation today?
No, but it seems like your mouth is feeling better. You sound more like yourself now.
Oh, it's miserable. It's literally just all I taste is blood, which is sucks.
I hate that feeling.
But we persevere. So I want to thank everyone who listened to this episode of Patriots 4th and 2. Again, Steve Bells, Sherry, Derek Havens here for PatsFans.com. Again, please subscribe to us on our YouTube and Apple Podcast channels. Like, share, leave us a review. Keeps us high on the podcast ranking so other Patriots fans can find us. We have a lot of different college, not only pro days, but different bowl events and different things to go ahead and kind of, analyze. And after the Super Bowls here, it's going to be not really that far off, Steve, before we're talking about Indy and everything else. And then there's going to be free agency and a lot of things to talk about and a ton of different roster moves. So, the first step for the Crafts and the Patriots was to go ahead and get Vrabel, kind of under center, to, for lack of a better term. And now that he's filling out his coaching staff, which we talked about today, now it's about, okay, well, where do you see the roster going on? That's where I think we're going to have a lot of changes and a lot of discussion coming up in the next couple of weeks. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, it's just, this year, I feel a lot more confident with the coaching staff than we did last year. There was, and I understand it. I mean, they had just let go of a legend, and they didn't know who their quarterback was going to be, and there was so many questions. But the coaching staff last year, we try to be optimistic here, but we both felt it. There was some questions of how they were going to to gel as a staff. I don't have a lot of that questions in my mind right now. I think this is going to be a really good coaching staff, so we'll have to see.
Yep, 100%. Well, we will be back next week, and we'll dive into whatever the next news is, Steve. Looking forward to go ahead and keep breaking this thing down, but I am confident and I'm excited about what they're bringing to the table, and we will see you guys all next Wednesday.